Welcome to Manu Forti Ministries presents Common Genius, Uncommon Destiny. I am your host, Reggie Key, and today I have with me my special guest, Eric Secker. Eric, how you doing, man?
Good. How about you?
I am all right. This is kind of special for me because you, sir, have seen and helped me evolve from the very early beginnings of getting an internet presence to where I am now. Though you were my web designer, one of my early web designers, and helped me relaunch my website. And so I really appreciate how you've kind of been really literally the backbone of what I've been able to do to get my talent, to get my business into the interwebs, so to speak, and get it out there for people to be able to see it. So it's a pleasure to have you on the show today, man.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, it's fun to watch and see your work grow over time. And it's fun to see how things in general change over time, too. You go back and
Yeah,
look at stuff we did 20 years ago, and you're like, boy, a lot different now. Yeah.
yeah. Like it was good. It was good back then. I
Right,
don't.
right, right.
Everybody has to start somewhere, right? And
Yeah.
that's very much what I want, the approach that I want to come from as we start talking about genius. Everybody has to start from somewhere. And so where we start with this interview is a very simple question, Eric. And that question for you is, do you consider yourself to be a genius?
Sure. I was going to ask you, does anyone ever say yes to this question? I
Some people
think
do.
I think, for me, I think, all of us have that hesitancy. There's that balance between humility and having self-esteem and, recognizing the talent that you have in yourself. So for me, it's actually kind of a different question because I actually, if you tested IQ wise, I actually technically am 160 IQ, a genius IQ level.
Wow.
So
Okay.
yeah, so a lot of people don't necessarily know that about me up front because I don't really talk about it. I kind of, it's a humility thing, I'm going
Yeah.
around being like, yeah, I'm a genius,
Right, right.
but again, that's a social placement, we can definitely talk about that. But, even as someone who falls in that category, I think it's very limiting. There's a lot more aspects to being
Yeah.
intelligent and genius than, I think our society has placed a very rigid and very narrow definition on that.
You
Broadly speaking, though, I do feel that I'm a genius, in the sense of a broader sense of the term.
Okay. So yeah, I'm gonna talk about this 160 real quick, but we're gonna talk about the broader sense because the broader sense is you mentioned several key words, and one was this balance, two of them actually were this balance between humility and self-esteem. Like genius is all about self-affirmation because if you don't know, it's almost like knowing your name. If you don't know your name when somebody calls you, then you won't know the answer. And if you don't know that you have this genius potential on the inside of you, you won't know that you have something special and unique to offer the world around you, and then begin to contribute through that way. And when you allow the world to form what your idea of genius is, it is very limiting. That's the other word that you used. And so this is interesting because you're the first person who has said like, "Hey, I know my numbers though, like 160." So from that perspective, you're saying like, "Yeah, I am." But to your point too, is I always I've been thinking lately of Wile E. Coyote. Like he would introduce himself with his car, like Wile E. Coyote. It's like it's not about doing that, but it's about getting up every day and being like, "Yeah, I have something that when I tap into it, I can improve the status of people and places and things around me. And that just makes you feel like you belong and you have purpose. And so that's what I really want to tap into. That's the broader sense that you began to allude to, because how we typically define genius as, well, it must be academic. You must have a high GPA. You must have a high IQ. That's one type of genius, but there's a plethora of other avenues where people can express their genius that have nothing to do with that.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I think for me, it's a big mix between uh, not just the things that but also the passion that you have about it. And I certainly can think of people who have a high rank, so to speak. Yet, if I talked about them, I wouldn't necessarily call them a genius if we used it in a broader sense. It's all about how you use the gifts and talents that you've been given. And you
Absolutely.
can certainly be considered smart, but not use those gifts and talents in a way that's, good for you.
And for you and I, because we share the same faith, I mean, it gets even deeper because, I mean, even the talents that you just mentioned aren't our own, they're God given. And so
Mm-hmm.
when we begin to understand that the goal of accessing these talents is not to promote ourselves, but to advance, to give God the glory, to advance his kingdom, then we really start tapping into, the Bible doesn't use the word genius, but it uses the phrase, the mind of Christ.
Mm-hmm.
And now we start getting into some spiritual matters like, okay, if I can tap into the mind of Christ, then what are the things that I know? Like I can receive knowledge, I can receive a word of wisdom, a word of knowledge about any particular given subject matter according to the Lord's will to help me or help someone else in a circumstance to help propel them. Most of the time, once you self-affirm, the genius doesn't stay focused on you. It begins to turn outward and see like, who can I help? Who else can I help? Let them see the genius in them and combine and work with them. So it gets really into this bigger scope, this broader sense that you're already mentioning. So
Mm-hmm.
my follow-up question for you is this. And I'm trying to figure out the best way to ask you this because, like I said, you're the first one who has said, like, by IQ standards, I do have
Mm-hmm.
IQs. Who comes to mind? I'm gonna frame it to you this way. Who do you think comes to most people's minds when they hear this word genius? What name, what face pops up in most people's
Yeah,
minds?
sure. Well, I'm sure it's probably Albert Einstein. Uh, I love to try and know of other people, like Meryl Streep, I know is one who's an actress who also has a genius IQ. And, you know, I think Albert Einstein's kind of a bad stereotype because there's a lot of people who are that, at least that level of intelligence who you might see as just a normal person or someone in your everyday life. And we've kind of created almost a negative stereotype around it, or that someone unobtainable either or eccentric or way out there.
You are hitting the nail on the head. Like it's unattainable the way and it's a negative stereotype that we've created. Not
Mm-hmm.
taking anything away from Albert Einstein, but it's like when we associate this word to him, we automatically say, well, I'm not Einstein. I don't know anything about physics. I don't even like physics. So therefore, incorrectly we'll say, well, I must not be a genius because I'm not him.
Mm-hmm.
And that's where we err, right? As human beings, because we like to compare ourselves to other people a lot. And when we fall
Mm-hmm.
short, we throw the baby out with the bathwater. Like I'm not Einstein, so therefore I'm not a genius, right? So it's interesting. I like that you mentioned Meryl Streep. I didn't know that she had this genius IQ either, but I like that you mentioned someone being genius that's not necessarily known academically. She's a genius and she expresses it as an actress.
Mm-hmm. Right.
Like she's
Right. And I
considered.
think a lot of people, if you look at her acting, people really admire her ability to really play a role. And I think that attests not as much to her IQ as it does to her determination and her work. You can tell she's really passionate about
Mhm.
her work that she does as an actress, and that she really makes a lot of effort in getting into these roles that she does. I can tell that she puts a lot of time and effort into it outside of the time you see her on the screen.
Absolutely. Right. So my next thing that I want to share with you is a quote. Well, before I share with you this quote, because it purportedly comes from Einstein, but now Facebook checkers be telling me that it's not him. And it doesn't matter at the end of the day who it comes
Mm-hmm.
from. It's an important quote.
Mm-hmm.
But I do want to talk about Einstein for a really quick second, because had Einstein listened to the people, the teachers in his life and the people in his life, both in secondary and post-secondary education, we might not have known who he was, because he
Mm-hmm.
was told, his parents were told like, hey, you might want to make sure your son works with his hands because he's not picking up what we putting down in his classroom. He thought differently, had the genius IQ, but he thought differently. He didn't think the way that they wanted him to think. He never subscribed to it. He was more of a visual person, and so even in college, as I've read and as I've watched documentaries about him, he would be staring out the window while the professor was teaching, and they'd be like, "Hello, Einstein, are you checking out? I need you to come back in." But what he was envisioning was, what would it look like to ride a sunbeam from a beam of light from the sun to the earth? And
Mm-hmm.
in that visualization, he began to come up with the theory of relativity. But that was, what's the word? That was unconventional thinking that did not fit into the environment that he was in. And so he was cast out. And so, how many of us are cast out because of the way we think, because it doesn't fit into this model that someone else has created to say, like, hey, look, your genes should look like this. And so that's what I want to kind of talk about. And you're already kind of alluding to some of the things, and I really appreciate what you said thus far. So that being said, you ready for the quote?
Mm-hmm.
Check it out. Let me know if you've heard it before, and let me know how it hits you. Okay.
All right.
It goes like this. If you judge a fish by how well it can climb a tree, it'll spend its entire life thinking it's stupid.
Mm.
Oh, you processing that.
Oh yeah, yeah.
So have you heard it before?
I have heard it, yeah. It's one that it's been a long time, but I'm pretty sure I've heard it, yeah. And I definitely agree with that. And it makes me think of a story that I've heard. I don't know if you've heard this one, but it's a teacher was given two classes of students. One was remedial students who were struggling, and the other was advanced students, like ones who were ranked really high IQ or and she was giving them both. And at the end of the semester, they looked at their progress, and the remedial students hadn't made any progress, and the advanced students had gone up like a whole level. And then at the end of that semester, they told the teacher, guess what? We gave you two groups of the same students. The only thing we did was tell you that one was remedial and that one was advanced.
Wow.
And that goes to show you both the impact that educators can have based on their motivation, but then also, how did that impact the students too? Was there other stuff going on with them too, based on that maybe they, based on what the teacher was saying to them, were not doing as much potential either, all those components. So I love telling that story. I worked in higher ed, so I've got some of that connection too. So
yeah, I might have to use that.
It makes me think of that a lot. Yeah, you're feel free to steal that one too.
Thank you. So, but yeah, it does reinforce this quote, which is going to become a metaphor for me, because I have a lot of imagery that comes to my mind. Of course, I see a fish. I see a fish on an island next to like a tropical tree, like literally banging his head up against this tree, trying to climb it, and like it's on an island, meaning there's water right next to it. And we know that fish, God designed fish for the water. God designed fish with fins, gills, scales, and even streamlined for it to thrive in the water. But if you take a fish out of its element and then try to describe it or rate it according to this element that it was never designed for, you're going to misjudge it. And two, let's say this fish is sentient. If it begins to have an educator or someone who represents a system that say, hey, look, you're not doing what it is we want you to do, then you don't belong here. You're a fish out of water, literally. This fish would be like, man, something's wrong with me. But its element is like literally right next to it. That's how I see it in my mind. And so Einstein is a bear, right? He climbs trees. Like his tree is physics. That's what he climbs. And there are some who are gifted in physics. We've seen some other brilliant minds, Stephen Hawking and the like, who can think along those lines. But yeah, they're bears though. And the thing of it is, what is the element that you belong in, I belong in, everyone belongs in, so that we can start to swim and thrive the way a fish does in water? That's what I get when I think of this. And so to help us figure out our element, God gave me, when he gave me this book to write and these workshops to start to do, he gave me 3 components that can help us find our element and help us figure out how to operate in it. And it's passion, you already mentioned that, talent, and purpose. So we're going to talk a little bit about that. We're going to do the same thing we did with genius, kind of deconstruct it and then reconstruct it to figure out what it is that we're really talking about when we say things like passion. So I heard you mention the word determination when you talked about Meryl Streep. What are some other things, some other words that come to your mind when you hear that word passion?
I mean, as a Christian, for me, passion is definitely connected to religion, and like feeling like that serving out of some purpose that's greater than yourself, you know, that I'm not just doing it to make the money, but that I'm helping others, or that I'm doing something that has a broader impact. And I think that's something that, you know, everyone to a degree can resonate with. We want to feel like our life has meaning beyond ourselves, you know, that it has some kind of impact. And I think that's a big driver of our passion, for
Yeah,
sure.
absolutely. And it makes me think of you in particular, because when I met you and I began to talk to you, I forgot how the conversation came up that, I had this book and I needed a website, and, I had already had a website and you helped me do my first relaunch. If your prices, you have I don't know, I don't want to call what your company was a passion. What was the name of your company again?
I think it was Piazza Design back then still, yeah.
Piazza Designs, right? So
Hmm.
I'm going to redefine this word passion in a second, but
Hmm.
you had a skill set that you knew how to start and maintain a website, and you wanted to improve, you wanted to see and give a platform to other people who had ideas, but you didn't go out and set an astronomical price that then made it so that nobody could access you. Like, man, I'm just starting out, I can't
Hmm.
afford that. You always have very reasonable prices that allowed you to help me and to help countless other people launch their platform. So, you could have made it about yourself and be like, look, I got a genius IQ. I know how to operate this. You do not. And here's my price. And whether you can pay for it or not, that's on you. But this is my price. It wasn't about you. It was about how can I make this something that is attainable for you, which is what we're talking about, genius being attainable and not unattainable. And so I always appreciated that about
Hmm.
Together Designs. And then I know it morphed into something else. What was the name of the company that came after that?
I mean, that's just my name, like ericsecker.com is kind of what
Yeah.
it goes
Yeah.
as now, yeah. Still doing web design consulting things, but yeah.
Yeah. And so, like I said, I've always appreciated that about you. I was trying to shout you. I think cyclically every couple of years I just shout you out randomly. Like,
Yeah, well, I appreciate those referrals. Yeah, it was nice, you know, and that's when your passion shows in what you do, you can find that things will just kind of organically come together. You know, like for me doing web design, I never advertised. I just got referrals from other clients, or I had people reach out to me. In fact, I started in web design because I did something for free. I was actually into architecture growing up, and
okay.
I started a support website for an architecture program for people, and I just did it. You know, it was like the company didn't have one,
Yeah.
and I started doing that to help people out because I was passionate about helping people. And so I made a website and had tutorials, and it was nice enough the company even linked to it on their website, you know, on their forums. And so then I got people coming to me for architecture stuff, and then they're like, "Hey, your website's really great. Can you do a website for us?"
Yeah. Yeah.
And that's kind of how I got started in web design. I was just in high school back then. Yeah,
We've been doing this since high school. Okay.
high school. Yeah, that's when I started doing. I think eighth grade or early high school, I started doing architecture stuff and then transitioning into web design, which I just taught myself. And back then it was kind of the height of the internet boom. So it was like
Yeah.
there were
Yeah.
all these companies that were kind of doing what we were talking about. They were just kind of giving it away instead of now it's this, you know, pay $500 and I'll
Right.
give you this case study about how to do a great web design. Back then it was like
So,
a web
hey,
company's like, hey,
yeah.
this web thing's really cool. Let's just put all the info out there. And so I learned a lot through places like that.
And you're just doing it I'll say for the love of it. I mean, most of the time when
Mm-hmm.
we think of passion and when we start telling, eighth graders, hey, what do when you focus on what you want to do with your life, focus on what you love. But Eric, there
Mm-hmm.
was a book that I read that changed my life that came from the exact opposite end of the spectrum and made it biblical though. And the book was called The Assignment, and it was by Mike Murdoch. And
Mm-hmm.
Mike Murdoch essentially said, hey, look, if you want to figure out what your assignment is in life, your God-given purpose is, you need to figure out and focus on what you hate, actually, more so than what you
Mm-hmm.
love. I was like, huh. Because what he said was, hey, look, basically, mankind was put on this planet to solve a problem. Like Satan got cast down to earth when he, got to that humility. He had none of that. His hubris got him kicked out of heaven, fell down to earth. Now the earth is out of order because it's wrecked with sin and wickedness. And God looked out and said, I need to do something about that. And what he did was he created a being in his image and likeness to bring order back to the earth. But of course, we know what happened. Sin came, corrupted us. But then, I'm fast forwarding. Jesus restored our authority for those of us who believe. And now when we look around, each of us individually, we'll look around and we'll see the same disorder that God sees, but God will prick our hearts with a little bit of the grief that he has when he sees the earth. And that grief will become something that we're like, man, somebody need to do something about that. I hate when that. I hate seeing that operate, right? And a lot of times how it gets our attention, Eric, is it's something that has traumatized us as a child or traumatized somebody that we love, to the point where when we get older, we're like, somebody has to do something about this. Can somebody? And if you find yourself continually saying and asking that, then it's clear that the person that should be doing something about it is you. Because it pricks your heart. You've heard the expression, like, I hate that with a passion. Well, that's the drive now. That's the determination now to go towards a thing and say, I need to do something about this, right? Somebody has to be an advocate for the fish to say, hey, look, man, don't you see that's a fish? Why are you killing this fish, right? Because if a fish stays out of water long enough, back to my quote in this metaphor, it's going to die. And so somebody has to come along and say, I hate that we're killing this fish because we're so driven on how we wanted to define it when we need to just put it in the water. And I feel like that's kind of what I've been put on this planet to do now. Like I look around and I see genius dying around me, and all I want to do is resuscitate, revitalize, and resurrect it. Right. So how do you feel about that definition and that concept of passion being linked to what you hate?
Yeah, sure. I think that's an interesting twist on it. And it definitely makes me think of, like failures in life or times in life when I think it helps me not only define where I want to go based off of what I didn't do, but I think those things can also, like the failures and things kind of help keep you from going off course, So like you might think you found your passion, and then as you kind of get into it and have some failure in that department or something, God's kind of like steers you in the other way, helps you find where your true calling is. I think, we all face that struggle. It's very easy. There's a book, it's a short book by John Ortberg called Overcoming Your Shadow Mission. It's all about, like God has this mission for us. And a lot of us, we get focused on this, we'll get the side focus, something distracts us, maybe it's the lure of money or something, kind of pulls you out of your main calling and purpose. And so people following this shadow mission we talk about, so it makes me think of that, and trying to reflect on, those failures or things that kind of help keep you on course. Yeah.
Eric, man, you put me on game, man. I want to write that down, but I don't want to get distracted. I have to remember that. What's it called? The Shadow Mission?
I think it's called Overcoming Your Shadow Mission. It's a John Ortberg, like a short book. Yeah.
Yeah, this assignment is like a short book too. I think it's barely 50 pages, but it's powerful though. So yeah, that's good though, because that's why I say I love talking to middle schoolers, high schoolers, because when they start thinking about, well, going to college, how I chose my major was trying to chase money. I was like, I'm gonna be an engineer because engineers make a lot of money, but I'm not in engineering anymore because it wasn't my passion. It didn't have anything to do with, I'm a logical thinker, but it didn't have anything to do with how God had made me. But that's all I knew. And so now, if I talk to some kids and I'm like, focus on what you hate, you may find out that you don't need to go to college to unlock your genius. But if you do, at least you know where to focus your major around when you identify this genius by your passion, talent, and purpose. And I love that you're bringing up failure, because even though it's only 3 components, it's very much like putting a puzzle together. And if you have the wrong orientation or the wrong piece altogether, you won't be able to fit the pieces together to come up with this bigger vision of what it is you're put on this planet to do. And so that's the thing the universal thing that I think everybody hates is failure. And so we sometimes will run from failure, but in actuality, failure, I have an acronym for it. It's the first attempt in learning. It's the first attempt in learning. Like, is this my passion? Or it might not be. Maybe I need to go find something else. But once you get into it, you're like, you can fail, but as long as you learn from it, you're like, well, I'm going to continue in this. This doesn't mean that I'm not meant for this. It'll be a burning on the inside of you. Or like some of my past guests have said, it'll be like the gas in your tank that'll keep you going forward. I always think of David and Goliath at this point, because when you start to focus, I'm going to ask you in a minute what you hate, Eric, but when you start to focus on what is it that you hate, it very much becomes a David and Goliath moment where you're like, David was like, man, somebody need to do something about this giant though. Like, how long he been out here taunting y'all? 40 days, nobody's doing anything. You know what? I'm gonna do something, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so when we start to get into talent, we start to get into like what has God put in your hands to address your passion. And so, you got to be careful not to let what other men put in your hands, which is getting into labels and different things like that. You got to make sure that that doesn't override or become the shadow mission of what God has put in your hand. Because
Mm-hmm.
David,
Yeah.
when he stepped up and said, "I'm gonna take this giant out," they tried to give him Saul's armor. He was I don't know how old he was, but he was not a full grown man. But they tried to give him this full grown king's armor. And he was like, that doesn't fit me.
Mm-hmm.
That's not my thing. Where's my slingshot? I've killed lions and bears with this slingshot. I know what to do with that. Like, give
Mm-hmm.
me that and 5 smooth stones and watch what happens, right? And we see what happened.
Mm-hmm.
He toppled the giant, lopped his head off, and then his whole career took off from there, right? Even though there was some adversity. And so, it becomes this thing of making sure that we don't let somebody else define who we are and then begin to put labels on us that make their world
Mm-hmm.
make sense, but have nothing to do with how God sees us and who he wants other people to see us as. So,
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah, it makes me think back to your point about Albert Einstein, how he struggled in school. And I had some of those experiences too, as did a lot of people that I was in, advanced classes with who, learned differently. Or for me, I was loved learning on my own. That was I taught myself web design. So talk about, going in on my own,
yeah,
a lot of stuff that I learned was on my own. And, I had my failures in school also. And I think it's important just to remind people that, when you fail at something, it doesn't mean you're not genius. It often means you're not passionate about what you're doing, or you're not realizing that you have some other passion that's what's going to propel you forward. And, I experienced that, and that helped me, kind of redirect my course through growing up. I had been interested in architecture, I'd been in biology, and then when I got into college, that was kind of my first real experience of really interacting more with people. And so that's when I went into Christian ministry. If you talk about being all over the place, they're like, wait, what? So web design is what I do, but I'm also, into ministry and helping people. It's kind of where my passion is. And, to another point is that, you don't have to expect things to happen overnight either. It can be a long course. And
can be.
for me, I can look back and see how all those things built me up into what I am now. They had a purpose still, even though they weren't the end path.
Absolutely. Right. And if you keep God, like if you just keep chasing after his will, even when you go down the wrong place, but when you
Mm-hmm.
recalibrate and reset, he can take what was meant for evil and use it for good. Right. So
Mm-hmm.
it's an important testimony to remember too. So you mentioned your learning style. I'm going to give you an example a little bit that gets these
Mm-hmm.
learning styles a little bit more. But before I do that, I do want to come back and ask you directly. You've said what you're passionate about, but I want to rephrase it and see if it hits different. Like, tell me, Eric, what do you hate?
Mm. I know I definitely hate people who are self-centered or stuck up. That's kind of one that gets to me. That's always growing up. I've had a hard time with people who weren't thinking of other people, or that seemed very tunnel focused.
Yeah,
For me growing up, I was always very observant of everything around me, very aware of other people and what they were doing, and trying to be focused on that. So, it was hard for me to kind of relate to people who seemed to me, at least, like where they weren't really thinking about other people or things like that.
sure. So
Um,
selfishness, would you say that's it?
mhm, yeah. And
Selfishness.
then just for me, like, I think superficiality or lack of feeling or emotion, I think, especially among men, that's something that's so prevalent these days. And
Mm-hmm.
I always, especially, by the time I grew up as a Christian. By the time I was in third grade, I had a really unique kind of like deep praise life with God. I went on a trip to California. It was kind of like my family's first time taking a vacation. We didn't have a lot of money for that.
Okay.
And we went to California. It was just kind of like an eye-opening experience for me. Um, so I also kind of hate just, when things are very not deep, or, kind of shallow or impersonal.
Superficial, self-centered.
Mm-hmm.
Those things
Mm-hmm.
are all related. I even feel like I'm stuck on this book title. I even feel like
Mm-hmm.
there's some focus for you on the shadow mission, because the shadow
Mm-hmm.
mission comes up in its darkness. It comes up from self-centeredness, I feel like, because it makes you focus on the surface level and be like, well, money. Everybody needs money, so I'm going to focus on that, and it avoids the deeper meaning, the deeper purpose that a person has. And so, okay, I'll hold on to that. We're going to see how this begins to shape itself out.
Mm-hmm.
So going now from David to another character in the Bible, Moses. Now, because we focused on passion. You've told me what you hate, and we're going to link that to your passion. But then now we have to focus on the next component, which is your talent, because the thing that David knew that he possessed was this tool, what was in his hand, what he already had been used to using. And Moses had a similar issue, but he couldn't see what was in his hand beyond what other people he knew would say about him. So when God told him, hey, look, you're going to be my deliverer, you're going to deliver my people from Egypt, he was like, yeah, but I stutter though. And he was like, don't focus on that. I'm gonna give you your brother. Your brother's going to speak for you. And he was like, well, again, he reminded God who made him of his shortcomings. He's like, yeah, I'm not eloquent of speech. And he's like, look, dude, what's in your hand? And he's like, well, just my walking stick. He was like, yeah, put that joker on the ground. Puts it on the ground, you know what happened? It turned into a snake. Pick it up by the tail. It turned back into a staff. He said, you have it. Basically, God told him you have everything you need right here in that staff. Go deliver my people. And we know that through that staff, 10 plagues came upon Egypt that then allowed Egypt, not allowed, but it forced Pharaoh to go like, you know what, get out of here, let my people go. And so that's the thing, like we already talked about it, we already established it. Talent, self-centered people will say it's my talent. But people who are aware of who created them will know that it's a parable about the parable of the talents. This is God's talent. What would he have me do with it, right? And so your talent, basically, Eric, is your God-given tool to address the thing that you hate. Because I didn't say this earlier, I'm gonna say it now. The wickedness that's in the world, the sin that's in the world, has created a brokenness in the world, right? And so when you come upon something that's broken and you feel like you have the means, the know-how to fix it, you need tools, right? And so the talent is that T for talent, T for tool. That's what helps you address the thing that's broken. And so right here at this junction, I just want to pause for a second and give you a little story, like a real story about some students. You gave a story about students in the classroom. I'm gonna give you a story about some students in the classroom
That's
that I
great.
think helps to really drive this home. So
Mm-hmm.
in Illinois, I was called by a principal to come to a classroom, 10 little boys, and they would have been deemed remedial, right? They were in the third, fourth, and fifth grade, but these third, fourth, and fifth graders were all put into one classroom, isolated from the rest of the population of the class of the school altogether. So they're literally fish out of water. They're being told you don't learn correctly, you have ADD, you have ADHD, you are emotionally disruptive, all these negative labels put on there. And the teacher's like, the principal's like, can you just talk with them on a weekly basis? And I'm like, sure. I was workshopping this whole genius idea, so I came to them and I tried to put them in the water right away. Eric, I was like, you're geniuses. And they looked at me and were offended. They were like, who are you talking to? Don't call me that. Because they had this programmed idea of what a genius was. And they was like, you're in the wrong classroom, mister. Like, that's not who we are. They were accepting these other labels that have been put on them. So I'm like, all right, that's fine. We'll leave that alone. We'll come back to it. And I began to talk to them about, well, what's your passion? But you can't talk to third, fourth, and fifth graders about what your passion is. I framed it how I framed it to you. I said, tell me what you hate. And Eric, these little boys looked at me like, did he really just give us license to do this? Like, oh. And these little boys, Eric, who could never agree on what to play, when to play, they couldn't agree on anything. Universally, they all told me the same thing. They hated the same exact thing, which is, basically, if you were to ask the fish in that metaphor, in that quote, what it hated, and they could talk, obviously, I think it would tell you that it hated that tree. That tree represents a system that's telling them that that telling this fish that it's less than. What do you think is this system that was telling these kids that they were less than? Not directly, but indirectly telling them every day you don't fit in. What do you think that system was that they all could identify and tell me that they hated?
So what was it that they
What do you
hated
think they
about this?
told me? All these 10 little boys that can never agree, they all told me the same
Mm,
thing. We hate this, Mr. Key. What do you think they told me it was?
I don't know, the class, the class they were in.
Basically, right? The class
Mhm,
the class is a representation of the school. So they were like,
mhm.
we hate school, Mr. Key. Now what?
Hate school, yeah, sure.
And they just knew they had wrecked my workshop. They was looking real pleased with themselves too. Like, yeah,
Mhm,
what you gonna do with that? But I'm like, hey, I agree. You should hate school because this is making you feel like you don't belong. You're being, I didn't
mhm,
use this word, but they're being marginalized. And I said, let me explain to you why you hate school, right? And they're like, all right, fine. And I was like, look, there are 8 different ways to learn, 8 learning styles, 8 learning languages, but at most, you're only really being taught from 3.
mhm,
You either have to be a visual learner, a verbal learner, where you take in information through what's being told to you, or you're a logical left brain thinker, right? And you're also forced to be, for you, you're also forced to be an interpersonal learner, meaning you have to learn socially. But
mhm,
if you don't speak one of those 3 languages, or 4, because I mentioned the fourth one, I normally don't mention that fourth one, then you're going to feel like the information that's being presented to you is in another, literally in another language, and something is getting lost in translation. You'll be like, I don't get it. I don't understand what's being told to me. And the other learning styles that I like to talk about that I clearly saw in them were either kinesthetic, meaning they got to move to
mhm,
process the information. But every time they move, sit down, be still. You move, you're doing the most, right? Or they're exploratory or expeditionaries, mean they got to put their hands on stuff. But then, when you put your hands on stuff in classroom, hey, keep your hands to yourself. Stop doing that. Put that down, right?
mhm,
Or maybe you're what you said. It's not. It's the opposite of social. It's the opposite of interpersonal. It's an intrapersonal learner. I know, like I hate it when I got to learn something new and everybody's talking. I can't focus, and I need to be by myself so I can internalize what's being said. But if you're forced into these other learning styles with a different learning style, you're going to feel like you don't belong, and you're going to hate the place that you're being forced into this system.
mhm,
So that's just a part of it, though. So Eric, what I said to him was like, look, once you know what your learning style is, and we already talked about this, instead of running away from the thing that you hate, you need to be like David and Goliath and start to run towards it. And now, though, what you do is having identified, or there's easy tests that you can take to figure out what your learning style is. And most of the time, you can manifest it, and if people are aware, they can see it. I was like, if you take your learning style and then allow it to become a teaching style, which means you go to school, you continue on, you don't run away from it, you get a degree, you come back. Now, as a teacher who's teaching from their learning style, you're going to reach other people who have the same learning style. And now you're fixing the brokenness of the school system by just
mhm, mhm,
representing a learning style that's not being given.
mhm.
And I'm like, so
Yeah,
you're future
good.
educators.
Mhm,
And they were
mhm,
like, oh snap! Yeah, you're teachers, like you're future teachers, and they got real quiet on me. But that's revolutionary because now the very people who are being marginalized, I just identify them as the solution to the thing that is broken that they hate.
mhm,
And so to me, I think that's powerful, right?
mhm.
Because
Yeah.
now we're equipping and allowing people to not be pushed to the side because of how they learn, but to be incorporated into a system because of how they learn.
Mhm. Yeah, sure.
What do
I
you think
like
about
too that just that you even just giving them that idea that they could be a teacher. I think, it makes me just think a lot of people just they have no concept of anything they want to do or they think they're capable of doing. And even just planting an idea, like for me, it reminds me of in first grade, I had a teacher who really introduced us to a lot of things and she'd give us a lot of different, vocabulary words and cards. And I got one day, it said architect, and that's when
Hmm.
decided I wanted to go into architecture. And I was only a first grader, it's like most first graders, you never even
Can't
heard
even
about
spell it.
that till later in
Right.
life. So, introducing even just an idea to someone can really help too. So I
Yeah, the
think you
kingdom is
probably
all about,
planted seeds just from that also. Yeah.
that's exactly what I was getting ready to say. It's all about planting seeds, right?
Mm-hmm.
So Now, that learning style, I'm telling them is it could be their talent. It could be their tool to then address the thing that they hate, which is school, right? But this is where everything begins to be more generic, because at the end of the day, Eric, your purpose in life, getting to the last part of the equation, is to identify what your God-given talent is and utilize it as a tool to address the brokenness that's driving what you hate, your passion. And when you do that, when you combine those three things, you're going to unlock your genius. You're going to begin to impact the world around you for the better.
Mm-hmm.
So what would you say your talent is, Eric?
But I'd say, if I'm going to keep it real broad, I've always been a very visionary person, very observant. I think the observance, the more immediate, like I grew up always being, my parents were into nature and into birding and things like that. So I was always connected with the outdoors, and that made me very aware of things around me. And I think, from that, I kind of developed a visionary gift. And I definitely feel like that was something that God gave me, or even was planted in me. Just kind of what we're talking about, even, that when we talk about things that are broken, how to fix them, just that ability to see that, so even when I was doing web design, for example, as a job, for me, it would be able to see a website and just to see, okay, here's what doesn't look good, here's how I'd fix it, or to look deeper, like here's how people are probably going to use this, and here's what would be missing. Just that ability to kind of like see, pull the layers back and see, deeper underneath things, what's going on.
That's pretty cool, because you are very much, as a web designer, as this having this company, you are a virtual architect, because
Mm-hmm.
for a website to function, it needs to have infrastructure, it needs to have a framework, right? There are some mechanics, not mechanics per se, but there are some very structural things that have to be in place in order for the blog to be here, and the graphics to be here, and for for you to have a panel that slides through. There's a very organized way that has to be presented, and that's the background. That's the thing that the people don't see. And I'm hearing this for you, that since a child you've been one who has this ability, this vision to see things. There's a scripture that says, to call things out that be not as though they were.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So you can hear a person's business plan. Like when we sat down for the first time and I said, hey, look, I need to relaunch my website. Of course, you had to ask, well, what is it that you're trying to do? And as I began to tell you what I wanted to do and the content that I had, you were able to begin to envision what I couldn't see.
Mm-hmm.
Like, well, I see that you need this for your website, and I see that you need this, and begin to put it together by just hearing the components of what I need. So it reminds me, I believe, I can't remember if we have started recording or not when you said this, but didn't you say you're a consultant for something?
Yeah, I'll do like business consulting too, or some things that get a little broader than just web design. And I have
Yep.
a passion for that. And again, talking about shadow mission, web design is kind of my shadow mission in a way of, what I'm really passionate about is helping people or doing things that, so for people starting up a business, I loved working with those groups because it was about helping those people and seeing them thrive and grow, and, being able to help them out, especially people who, might have struggled otherwise, or just trying to deal with all the expenses and things initially.
Yeah.
Or
You're
just finding someone who can tell them, like, how do you do this? When I think of starting something, it's like, where do you even go?
right.
Looking at yellow pages for like someone who helps you magically start a business or something.
Right. You're a vision caster, man. And of course, a lot of times we talk about seeds. We have to start, the other scripture that says, well done, my good and faithful servant. You have been faithful over a few things. I will make you ruler over many. That's in the parable of the talents, right? Of Matthew 18. And so the vision that God had for you was grander and larger and broader than where you started. Where you started was just, well, let me just try and bring some structure and help people out by helping them design websites. But the thing that you learned in how to internalize what people are saying they need, and then forecast that into something that's larger than they can even see, that's where your gifting is, right? Because when you come up with a business, you need a vision and mission. Most people say, mission and vision, but actually the vision comes first. And people a lot of times know the mission, but if they don't have a broader sense of what the vision is, they'll begin to fall short and not know when they've actually reached you have to gauge how successful you are by benchmarks that are getting you closer to your vision. But if you have no vision, if you have no long-term goal, then your mission will fall short because you won't know that you're hitting it. And so I see you as one who helps people come up with the vision so that the mission of the rubber meeting the road can really begin to take off, and then they can begin to mark, like, am I staying on target, or am I starting to vary now? Am I starting to get off track? And so that's what I see you as doing. And I think it's wonderful that you've been paired with a wife who is in counseling, because that those two things come together to really service the complete man. Like, yeah, what happens when your vision is getting off, and you're like, man, I'm a failure, and you get stuck and you get depressed and you don't know how to get out of this funk. Well, now your wife can come in and be like, let's help you get out of this funk. Let's help you refocus, right? And so I see that. I mean, of course, being married, your vision and your gifting and your genius is not something that you just carry by yourself now. It's something that you're now partnered with a very specific spouse who can help you help others in a way that unlocks both of your genius.
Yeah, sure. That definitely, that makes me think about my wife and I kind of starting up her counseling practice. And, one of the things that drew me to her was just that she had been through challenges and struggles in life. And I think that can be, people think of themselves as like something trying to bloom among thorns. And something that we've been talking about with our counseling practice is helping people to realize, maybe you're not even among thorns. Maybe your perception is that you're among thorns, but really you've been given something that allows you to turn into something even greater. And I think for people who've struggled in life or been through challenges, they are more passionate. They're not satisfied with where they're at. When you talk about those negatives, I think you hit it right on, finding the things that that you hate, the things that you dislike, the people who have those strong hates, they're the ones that develop the strongest passions to change that, to make actual change. And so, you may feel like you're in this horrible spot when really you're planted somewhere where, you've been gifted with some traits that could really allow you to, excel even more. Or, in my case, just finding someone who is deep and real. I talk about not liking people being superficial. I always knew I wanted to find someone, as a wife who was, deep and real and would connect on that level. So.
Yeah, and see, this brings real depth to ministry work, because by and large, when you look at ministry work, I feel like over the years it's gotten watered down, and it has gotten very shallow and surface level. But when you begin to get into what has traumatized me, the best ministry is a reflection of the hurt that you've experienced and that you're getting healed and delivered from. And when you're transparent enough to say, hey, look, this is what I went through, it allows you, it gives you this vision. And you use another word, I think you use projection, and it all relates to this visual sight that God has given us in the prophetic, actually. But when you begin to look at other people, you can be like, I see that operating on the inside of you, and I need to service that the way I've been serviced, right? And so that begins to drive you. I mean, the things that we are passionate about, they're not small. Like I said, it's literally David versus Goliath, but we won't care how big it is. I don't care. My wife, I've heard her say this. She didn't coin this, but I've heard her say this. Like, how do you eat an elephant? One piece at a time. Like, you don't care how big it is. I'm gonna chomp away at this thing until and know that I'm making a difference in my life and in the life of other people. And so, I see that for you, and I'm happy to hear what you and your wife continue to do together, and how it continues to kind of develop and grow over time, because it's going to be something that is going to turn into ministry work. It is something that's going to bring a depth to what has been shallow, right? And just one more thing that I kind of heard for you. It escapes me right now, Eric, but hopefully it'll come back to me. But just know that this seed that's in you. There are 3 stages, all right? One plants, one waters, and God provides the increase. And so clearly something has been planted in you from the Lord from a long time ago. The one thing that I failed to mention is talent is generational. Whatever your talent is, whatever you have that's in you is evident and passed on from God through your family, right?
Mm-hmm.
So you're just a continuation of what your family has been trying to manifest and what's been trying to manifest in your family. And now you're in a stage where you're being watered. You and your spouse are being watered. You have a child now, right? And so even that child will be raised in the fear and admonition of the Lord according to what they see you doing, so that it begins to spark what's already on the inside of them. And so you're going to begin to see it come out of your daughter even sooner than you. And so that's just a testament to the quickening of the talent and the passion that's on the inside of you, man. And so, it's beautiful to see. And I thank you for giving me some time to kind of sort it out and to put a label on it and let you know that you're operating in your genius.
Thanks, Sam.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So that's pretty much it, man. Unless you had any other questions for me, I can sign us out. This has been Reggie Key hosting Manu Forti Ministries, presenting Common Genius, Uncommon Destiny. Like I said, I've been your host. I'm a motivational speaker, preacher, and publisher and author. And this has been my genius guest, Eric Secker. And Eric, it's my uncommon cue to see the genius in you.
Thanks, Reggie. It's good talking to you.
Good talking to you too, man.
Thanks for joining us for this week's episode. Make sure you pick up the book, Common Genius, Uncommon Destiny, by my dad, Reggie Legend, available on Amazon and at inkwellspoken.com. Connect with us at inkwellspoken on all social media platforms. If you enjoy our content, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell so you never miss an upload.